Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for being here. I have something very interesting to share regarding ancient Egypt, and it came about as a discussion and reflection about social transformation, social liberation. My colleagues and I were looking at how the ancient world conceived of reality and how they wanted to preserve the feminine in a healthy balance with masculine power. So I started researching about 10 years ago how that happened in ancient Egypt. And before I really get started on that part of the presentation, I want you to bear in mind that in ancient Egypt, the sky and the heavens, the celestial, was different than in the Olympian gods of the Greek pantheon, how it was a patriarchal system. What has been revealed to a lot of Egyptologists and people who study the idea of cosmology is in ancient Egypt, Nut, the goddess Nut, was the firmament, and she was all of the cosmos. So the idea that the feminine, the nurturing power, was up above you and taking care of you and looking out for you is a big, important distinction to make when we get started on going through the actual transformation part of the ancient iconography. Now, when you look at the god Tef, Tef was the earth, but he was more of a male. But it was different. It was not what we consider a patriarchal male now. There was a receptive masculine that is no longer in our sociological nomenclature. The male had a life-giving power, but also a peaceful power. And that's a thing that we sometimes in the modern world do not take into account. The Egyptian secret is a hidden blueprint for social transformation. Let me give you a little bit of a background here so we can set it in context. The first thing is that we have Shu and Tefnut, which are the children of Atum, and then we have Geb and Nut. That is the firmament, and Geb being the ground, the earth, the substance, what we stand on, foundation. And then from these gods, we have the main pantheon of Egypt. Now, Nephthys and Osiris, Isis and Set, they're all brothers and sisters, but they're also consorts. So now Osiris represents the generative male. He's the healthy male. And he marries Isis, and she represents the goddess of beauty, the goddess of connection, and the goddess of fertility and brilliance, and so on. Well, Nephthys, she gets married to the god Set. Now, Set is a desert god, and Set cannot bear children. As you can see on the relief, Set does not have any progeny. So Nephthys, feeling like she's in a bad relationship, decides that she's going to dress up and look identical to her sister Isis. And when Isis is out of town, she is going to sleep with Osiris. And that's exactly what she does. And at the very bottom of the screen, you can see the god Anubis. Now, Anubis is the son that is born from Nephthys and Osiris. That child was originally going to be abandoned. And Isis decided, after finding out about the affair, decided, no, I'm going to make sure that child is raised. And she takes no anger out on her sister. She does not deal violently with Osiris or the situation. She deals with everything in terms of raising the child and for the well-being of everyone, and creates harmony. The main characters in the drama, Osiris, as you can see, Horus is going to be the child that is born from Isis and Osiris. We have Set. He's the evil one now, but he is a desolation god. And then at the far end, Nephthys, she's a goddess of the night. And she is basically everywhere you want to be, type of a spirit that is, she never completely abandons her husband, but she's always in the process of finding or helping or assisting, especially her sister Isis. Okay, so the myth through the lens of feminine philosophy. Nephthys decides that she wants passion and fulfillment in her life. Who doesn't? We all want to have a sense of connection, and we want to be with people who really nurture us and love us. And Nephthys was not experiencing that. So she sleeps with Osiris. Anubis is born, and Isis finds Anubis and raises him. She does not seek vengeance on her sister. Nephthys devotes herself to supporting Isis and protecting her from Set. And moving forward, here is where the blueprint itself starts to take shape. Now, the angry and jealous Set decides that he is going to take his vengeance. And originally, Osiris is put into a sarcophagus that matches his exact body. And Set gets a group of nobles to coax Osiris into the coffin. Once Osiris is in the coffin, they slam it shut, they lock it, they throw it down into the river, the Nile. And it's not completely certain that iteration of Osiris dies from drowning or from being entombed in the sarcophagus, but that sarcophagus is then found by a king, and the king uses the tree that the sarcophagus is encased in as the pillar of one of his temples. Now, Isis actually finds this temple, and Isis negotiates with the family and is able to get the sarcophagus of Osiris back. But the important thing about this part of the myth is that it's about feminine action, feminine generative working in the world. This is ending up what is going to change the world for the better. However, when Isis and Nephthys helping find the coffin and start bringing it back to bury it in Egypt, Set intercepts them again, and he ends up dismembering Osiris. And now think of this corpse as a mythical god body. Now they have the head going at one corner of the world, and we have the body and torso and legs and everything going in the four corners of Egypt. And of course, Isis laments the situation, and Nephthys takes care of her and consoles her. And after a little while, they decide that they are going to take feminine action, and they are going to remember the god body. The male god body, in a metaphor here, could represent this idea of the healthy masculine, the units of male consciousness that we would find to be either pleasant, attractive, or wanting to be around and connected to. So over a period of a year, Nephthys and Isis go out and they connect and remember the god body. So the first month they find one piece. They throw a big celebration in the place where they found that piece of Osiris. So now Osiris represents a magical and regenerative process in the psyche, and they build a temple where they have found this piece of Osiris. And now they take that piece and they bring it back to the sarcophagus, And then the next month they do the same thing and they find another piece. And then, of course, the next month they find another. And by the end of the year, this entire lunar cycle, they have collected 13 pieces of Osiris. Now, this is a mythical number because in the ancient Egyptian pantheon, they had 13 lunar cycles. Now, the 14th piece of Osiris is the phallus, and that was not found. So what happens is Isis fashions the sex organ according to her liking and according to what is essentially her dynamic of comfortability. And when she fastens the phallus onto the god body that's been collected, Nephthys helps her, and she becomes inseminated. Osiris comes back to life for just a moment, and she becomes impregnated with her son Horus, who represents the new era, the new dawning, the new beginning of life and love. So this process of remembering and bringing together all the pieces, this is essentially not only a psychological metaphor for wholeness, but it is a physical, sociological blueprint for bringing together the positive males. And the toxic masculine, when it takes hold of a society, the chaos ensues. And that is exactly what happened in the myth. So Isis and Nephthys have remembered Osiris. They have collected all the pieces of the healthy male god body. He was able to inseminate her. She is now with child. But what's happening in the physical world is that Set is running the world, and he's running it into the ground, and there's chaos and bloodshed and disease and destruction, etc. And that is a method of understanding that we call the Mot. The goddess Mot was the representation of truth and order. So Set, being the barren god who has usurped the power, that signifies us being out of balance with nature. Now, we can kind of look at it from a mythographic type of way, which is a funerary cult develops where the pieces of Osiris are assembled as a ritual. And this can happen each year, and it can happen with certain types of festival or in a symbolic ceremony. But no matter how you look at it, they have a very rich and very powerful funerary cult that develops. And now we're looking at roughly 4000 BC up until the Ptolemaic dynasty. That would place us just about the time of Christ. So where do we go from here? Well, Horus is born and is protected by Isis, Nephthys, Anubis. He's helping them situate this new reality. He was part of the process of finding the healthy male god body and bringing it together. Now, also you have the god Thoth, who helps out occasionally with this, and he's the one that is taking notes. He's the one that's charting things and placing a system so that this can be replicated. Now, here's where the myth is a little bit vague, but it's also very instructive and important, because what it shows is important for us to know today about toxic masculinity, and that is that right as Isis gives birth to the new god Horus, she has to be very careful to avoid Set at all costs. And wherever he is, she basically hides, and they were able to not confront him until Horus becomes of age. And that's about 14 years old. According to some myths, it's different. It can go up to about 20 years old. But now, once Horus is of age, he gets into the war with Set. And of course, Horus, who represents the god of righteousness and the god of peace and goodwill, the healthy masculinity overcomes the toxic masculinity. And now we have a reign in Egypt for thousands of years. We don't have an exact way to measure that. But in the end, Horus defeats Set after a lengthy battle, and Egypt prospers again. And how does that figure with us from a mythographic or mythological point? And how does that transfer to us today in a sociological way? Well, the Eno stands for Isis, Nephthys, Osiris, and Horus, all working together as a system. This would be like an assemblage, sort of a god body of sorts. The German term is the Lebenswelt, which is the life world. So now we have a healthy masculine and healthy feminine working together to create a sociological system of empowerment and awakening. And so now, how does that work within the blueprint of social transformation? Each year, certain women decide to go on a Eno, or pilgrimage, however you want to say it. It's very difficult to use the word Isis nowadays because of the connotations, but you go on the Eno pilgrimage. So each month, the generative feminine find what you would consider healthy components of the male form, people that you are drawn to, people that you find irresistible. Now, this does not have to be platonic, but this is mostly platonic in philosophy, that you are finding pieces of the male god body, people that you think can be your ride or die people. And now it doesn't necessarily have to be a male, but it represents a masculine process of protection, nurturing, and care. So now each month you have a small party. The party can be informal, the party can be formal, it doesn't matter. The goddess fashions this party in whatever way that she wants. And the idea is that each month, the goddess or the practitioner, the woman, at the end of the year, her idea is to connect at least 14 healthy male representations of what she would feel is the true male connection for her. Now, at the end of the year, you throw this beautiful party. The men can have lapel pins, or they can have leis, or they can be dressed in a certain way. And all of these women's friends and family can be invited to this ceremony. It represents the psychological remembering and the psychological healing from fragmentation. And this is a way that we can all think about how to turn toxic masculinity into an overcoming principle rather than a intractable problem that continues to defeat us. Now, of course, there's many different theoretical ways to interpret something like a social blueprint or feminine blueprint for social transformation. The idea is that from this myth, we're getting some very, very important insights. And one of those insights is that the feminine needs to be reconceptualized to be this gathering, proactive, and in a way assertive force. The gynocentered life can be just as powerful in this new modality as we might conceive of it in women's liberation type of ideologies or feminist ideologies. But what's being implemented more is this idea of the feminine eroticism and the feminine intimacy is being used for the process of finding healthy male companionship. And then over a period of a year or 2 years, depending on how many women decide to go on this type of pilgrimage with you, uh, very quickly over a period of a few years, you realize that many men have now been converted from this old type of masculinity into a newer, more generative and more supple and more caring and compassionate masculinity. But before that happens, we have to overthrow the toxic male ethos, and in order to do that, we really have our work cut out for us. And this really comes down to several factors. One of them is that the healthy eroticism of the feminine world has to be allowed by all of us to really bloom and connect people platonically as well as sensually and sexually. And in a way, the best example I can see now is sort of the Burning Man concept, where everyone comes for a special event with this idea that there's a ritual that's going to take place. Of course, we don't have all the answers with this whole feminine blueprint concept, but we know that this is essentially what Egypt did for thousands of years, every year, to keep a balance between masculine and feminine power. And the temples to Isis were very much about men that had been destroyed and lost, becoming found by a functionary in order to heal and reshape and transform that person's life according to the goddess's symbolic power. So now that means a lot for us, because this really changes how we understand our sexuality, because so many people have thought of femininity and then used toxic masculine power modalities, militant power modalities, in order to try to achieve feminine victory. And what the ancient Egyptians are really talking about is that we don't use the militant masculine modalities at all. We use the erotic and the sensual and the nurturing modalities, and from a small unit that grows, and then it overcomes the toxic before they have a chance to act. They've already been thrown by this new masculine feminine co-creative force. So how does this blueprint look if we were to do it, say, at a college campus? Well, you'd have to have one girl deciding that she's going to be the primary Isis figure, but then she needs one friend who has to agree essentially to be her nephthys, and this trusted sister has an obligation really to not abandon this woman in her full year of finding the healthy masculine for her in her life. And now they can find lesbian or trans or non-binary presenting people as part of their group. That is absolutely okay. This is not about a gender distinction because someone has male parts and someone has female parts. That is completely irrelevant. This is an energy experience of intimacy, collectivizing intimacy, and energizing intimacy. But it's not just the two women. You need one very dedicated assistant who functions either as a mentor or supervisor, ideally someone who has a lot of experience with either counseling or is someone you deeply trust. That person would be what we would call your Anubis. You want an assistant, a mentor, supervisor that's going to find people that are really, really connected to you. Now, each month, it's not mandatory that each month you have to find a male person, but theoretically, you're looking for about 14 up to 44, according to the myth, every year. And now one male or female recruit each month is sort of the ideal. And now you have one support group that becomes, your source for power and well-being. So now you're communicating. In this case, we're going to be using an app that we're developing to try to keep track of these things. And the Horus is born, and looks like what your circle of intimacy is really different now. You might be in a monogamous relationship, but your partner is going to be asked to be a circle rather than just bogarting all of your time. That does not mean that you're in polyamory. That does not mean now that you are having orgies. This is not anything like that. You have a sexuality all your own. You draw those lines. But what you're asking your partner or partners is that you're now creating a circle of intimacy that includes these people that you're bringing into your life world. And this idea of the Lebenswelt is very important because it's a functioning, Gilles Deleuze calls this a rhizomatic consciousness. So as we know, the rhizome is the network of roots that are underneath the biosphere of trees that send out the messages at sort of like neurosynaptic passageways, neurotransmitters and neurons underneath the soil, sending all this information about weather patterns and food and things like that. Well, in a way, this is very much like that. So you have now a circle of intimacy that you're agreeing to be a Lebenswelt together. So you're agreeing that your consciousness is kind of becoming more of a group consciousness, or at least partially a group consciousness. And that's why you have to be very discriminating about who you pick each month to continue to grow. Now, of course, if you get towards the end of the month or the end of the year and one of your choices has fallen out of favor, hey, no matter that you don't have to have 14 people. You can have 5, you can have 12, you can have 40. It's really more about you, and it's more about how you're reaching out. And what gets dangerous is if you're in a very committed monogamous relationship and that person is not capable of extending some form of intimacy to other people. That would be, I guess, one of the only real struggles. But let me just be very clear, that was not how the ancient world operated. The ancient Egyptians were a both and culture, not an either or culture. So their wives and daughters and lovers and mothers were at the temple to Isis, or they were at the temple to Hathor during festivals and during fertility rites. And what they did there stayed there, and what they did there was a function for the goddess. It wasn't part of the masculine domination ownership game. Since 400 AD, roughly, we've been in a whole different way of conceptualizing social relationships. So each year, we can repeat the blueprint if we want. Now, I don't recommend a woman who has done a pilgrimage to redo the pilgrimage again anytime soon. I mean, maybe once every 5 years, or maybe never. Once you do it once and you're done. But it's important that we each year find new feminine or female practitioners that want to go on this journey. And hopefully we have a handful of them, maybe even more. If we're lucky, we'll have even more. So each year you repeat the blueprint for the new young women in their 20s that are maybe just before they are getting married or whatever. It can be women that are now looking at their golden years and they want to do something magical. That works as well. And so there's really no age group or whatever. We're just looking at the idea that every year we would try to celebrate in that type of way. And then finally, the Set, who is the toxic masculine. Of course, we're always going to have toxic masculine people. And the idea is that we lessen the toxic masculine footprint, that we do that through these very beautifully crafted feminine expressions, and that the feminine expression, knowing what I know now from going to the Burning Man festivals and experiencing this idea of the Aphrodite, where she in all of her glory is celebrating, and she is essentially not dominated by the war god Ares or Mars. That dynamic all of a sudden has the possibility of changing the world. But normally what ends up happening is when women get together and they start expressing their intimate or sensual side, we immediately get foreclosed upon by violent men or territorial men. And so the idea is that we're trying to separate ourselves from the violent and territorial men as best as we can, and not privileging their discourse in this type of philosophy. They will wreck it and they will destroy it. And so we need to really stay as far away from the modalities of militant masculinity as possible. And that also includes militant feminism as well. It appears that it's a feminine progress, but a lot of times militant feminism activates the war mindset and the violence mindset. And according to the myth, we want to also kind of stay away from that type of structure as well. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you guys for listening. Have a wonderful year ahead. Thank you.
For sure. So I wanted to get into a little bit of Q&A and flesh out this idea a little bit more. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because we're talking about consciously curated groups of women centered around the Eno concept. Did these celebrations actually happen in Egypt? Like we have historical record that after or based on the Isis story, that these consciously created communities around the feminine were formed?
Well, what we do have is we have the Isis temples themselves, and we have some of the papyrus and some of the stelae and some of the material that shows that this was a ritualized procedure that occurred, but we don't know how far and wide it happened. Now, I have different photographs of the corpse of Osiris, where both Nephthys and Isis have turned into falcons, and they're basically hovering over the corpse. And there are a few theorists, Jan Osman and a couple other theorists, that have said that that is a sociological representation of these women making sure their men are within their connected space, that they're being looked after in that protective space.
And so you have a young woman, and she goes into her community and consciously chooses men or that masculine body to be part of her inner circle. She will choose a sister, a best friend, and that sister could also be male or female. The plumbing doesn't matter. It's the operating system of that person while they're in that position that's the important part. Yes?
Yeah. And the other good news is that you can have as much of the feminine energy at your parties as you want. What the myth is talking about, when you fashion the phallus prior to what gets born, the idea anyway from the papyrus is that the sensuality, the sexual components can be adjusted. So you want all your men to be there, and you want them to only be serving you and your nephthys and your small group, then yeah, you can have 12 to 1 dudes if you want. However, that is not that is very flexible. You can have parties where, yeah, your special guys are there, but they can bring their girlfriend, and they can bring a friend, and they can bring a sister. So that it's very fluid, as long as you make sure beforehand that you're really planning it out.
And so these parties or gatherings are like a coming out party where she's presenting not just herself, but her community. It's almost like her Knights of the Round Table.
Absolutely. This is her round table. This is her circle. These are her trusted people. And that's where she gets to implement her sort of her divine motherhood and her divine sex goddess and her divine sensual being. All of that. She's the glue now that is magically bringing this God body together. From the sociological perspective, most people get fixated on the death and resurrection part of this myth, but the livingness of the myth is equally compelling, and all of the components are really beautifully there.
And for me, I've always had these teams of people around me. When I was in college, it was a literal team. It was a rugby team, and all the guys were my brothers. It's like being a little sister to a fraternity. But it was a rugby team, and they were my protectors. And I had the best friend that was my sister. So that fell into my life and always has. Right now, I would say I have 12 or 13 strong, conscious men in my life. And some of them are married, and some of them have girlfriends, and some of them are single. But there are these protectors, and I could call on them at any time if I need something, and they will be there for me. And if I start making a bad decision, I can go to them and ask them for their counsel. And I do have that best friend, sister figure that is always right here and always available. And I'm in a completely different country than she is right now. And yet, with the miracle of our cell phones and our Zoom calls, I can counsel with her whenever we want. But that's my circle, and it's developed organically. But what about like other people's circles? Like, could I be a member of somebody else's circle? Maybe I'm somebody else's sister or somebody else's knight. Does it play that way? Or if you're the queen, then you're the queen?
Well, the dynamics are really very interesting. What it looks like from all the stuff that I've gone over is that as long as you are going to another person's circle, you can take an honorary third deity if you want, or you can be there just as a practitioner. But they should anoint you as whatever functionary that you are, so that you can be properly situated in their pantheon. But it is really their pantheon. So if you went there and you somehow stepped over your boundary, that would not be okay. But once you get anointed, then you really are a process of their God consciousness. And that's really the beautiful part about it. So you, out of most of the different people I've met in my life, you have really been this figure. You've had this knowingness about how men need to feel connected, but also how to connect them in a way that's empowering and also where it leads to abundance. But when you really embody it, all of a sudden, that's when the goddess starts to really become engaged, because it's a gnosis. And that is where we want to really encourage these young women to come from. Because when you have found your Osiris, you can just be radiating. You can have all the functions of the orgasmic and the sensual and everything else, and you're completely at home and you're completely comfortable. And that's the matriarchal alchemy. Because when a society shifts from the toxic masculine to the matriarchal alchemy, now we're in a place of abundance where people's needs are met, but also their sorrows are being looked after as well. They're not falling through the cracks of life, and they're not becoming destroyed. They're getting remembered, not dismembered.
And for me, with these guys that I have in my corner, I feel like each one of them has a different part of Osiris. And together, they are the full Osiris. Like I have Osiris fully remembered, put back together, but it's a little piece in each one.
Well, and now here's where the mysticism gets really wonderful to the Athena. So if you could imagine in the ancient world, they had the concept of the Hieros Gamos, where it was the male god and the female god came together, and they had this union. And what was born from that was so much more transformative than just the combination of all the particular parts. Right? So if I took a woman's egg and a man's sperm, and then I just went like this, and I took a picture of that, well, that's just two halves. That, that's not compelling. That's just an egg and a thing that looks like a snake with a big head on it.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens in that fertility, and all of a sudden now you have life. It's like the two components. And so that's really where we're going with this idea, with Osiris being reborn or coming back to life to now give birth to Horus, is that I don't want us to think of Horus as like a personage. I kind of almost want it to be an assemblage of all these men that you have perfectly fit together. And now your fertility, metaphorically, figuratively, your fertility now is creating the Horus. The Horus could be the invention of nuclear fission.
Right.
The Horus could be the invention of non-jet propulsion that puts us on a level unforeseeable.
It's whatever my project is that brings all of humanity to the next level. Because me, while I sit in this Isis space and I have found all the pieces of Osiris, and with those pieces, I birth a project that is one that brings love upon the world.
Beautiful. See, I mean, you have already been living this as an organizer, as a philosopher, as a matriarchal theorist. There's women that are Aphrodite, or there's women that are Hestia, or there's women that are Hera, or there's women that are Persephone. But what about when we start seeing the real pantheon of the feminine, and we start really getting all of these women to build their own constellations of healthy masculine power? Wow. All of a sudden, it's like Horus combines into mega Horus. We're looking at something really compelling, because it's the goddess that reanimates everything. Mm-hmm. It's never going to be birthed from a guy. The masculine is never going to birth the baby. This new world is going to be birthed by this divine feminine force. And so that's the beauty of this, to shift us from toxic masculinity. It's really exciting, and I'm glad that you're, leading the charge, really.
You're the one that put it on paper.
Well, this is a shared space, and I feel like these girls need you. They need women like you to show them that sexuality and sensuality and being a creatrix and all of these other things are right there in their grasp. If they go from the foundational feminism that they've been so used to a generative feminism, because now they are proactively shaping their existence.
Well, and the most important element of all of this is to note that you don't do it alone. We're so often, I can do that all by myself. You know, we have that attitude of radical independence. And radical independence is quite different than radical self-reliance. We think radical independence, they're like the same, but radical independence says, I don't need you. And radical self-reliance says, I am capable of taking care of myself, and therefore I have enough to share. So we need to shift from this mindset of independence to this mindset of building a team of which we can all work together on various different projects to bring the Homo sapien species into becoming humanity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the foundational distinctions that I've seen also is that, and this is an unfortunate realization, but it really does make a huge difference. The monotheistic religions that we've had set up since 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea with the Emperor Constantine, what's happened from that time onward is that we've become this one-dimensional Western civilization, and all healthy forms of eroticism and sensuality and sexuality went from being part of the sacred and spiritual amalgamation of spiritual life. It became demonized, it became unclean, it became sinful, you became a vehicle of the devil, you became a temptress. Adam and Eve, the whole idea of the Garden of Eden was all Eve's fault. Now we blame women for all of these ills of society, and that is the complete opposite of really the healthy masculinity and the healthy God consciousness, the goddess consciousness. So we really have to operationally dismantle this type of weird moralism that has demonized the processes of the goddess, and somehow revalorize all of these experiences of intimacy as okay in society, as long as it's ordained by the feminine.
Well, and that takes us to that conversation, and this would be a much longer conversation on consent. You know, women like being beautiful. We don't want to be vilified for being beautiful. And part of that beauty is we're appealing and we're sexy. And we have shame built in around that. And that shame ends up being an armor that we put around our heart. And it's our hearts that create all this amazing beauty in the world. So consent, where everyone agrees of the importance of consent, is so important because it allows me to be beautiful and sexy. And at the same time, if that pulls somebody in, I can say no. They can ask, can I get in your personal space? And I can say no. And they're not offended by it. And I feel protected by their asking. And so that's like a whole nother conversation we can get into. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Well, just the final thought is that going into campuses, what I'm seeing is, especially college campuses here in Southern California, where all the beautiful people are out and frolicking around, what I'm seeing is there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of rage, there's a lot of confusion about how people can start building communities and how they can really find the healing that they need, or the togetherness that they need. And what ends up happening a lot is they sacrifice the magic of their being in order to join some type of, in my view, very legalistic and very confining type of social group, where they have to do every little thing in order to belong and to fit. And much of that eliminates any of their ability to frolic and be part of something that's magical or get naked or celebrate. None of that is allowed in these little social groups. And so what ends up happening is lots of rage and lots of aloneness and lots of distrust. And so my goal is to get into college campuses with this message so that we can really reanimate and re-energize these young people to know that it's okay to start really feeling the truth of their being, and that is not a sinful thing, that whole sin dynamic is a construction that has led us into nearly continual and constant warfare and brutality, and we have to get out of that. That's not godly. That's not a framework of the goddess, and it can't be a part of the fabric of the future.
Amen. Amen. On that note, Jake, thank you so much for sharing all your work with the world and for inviting me to be a conduit for it. I
Thank you,
appreciate you
Athena.
very much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to many more.
Absolutely.
Cool. See you later.